Welcome to this presentation of the Waltham Historical Society. It's on the Boston Manufacturing Company and the beginning of the American Industrial Revolution. If you look at this picture here, you'll see the Charles River right along here, which originally was a southern boundary of Waltham before Waltham purchased the south side. And right here, you'll see the Boston Manufacturing Company mill complex. The interesting thing in this picture, however, it's the river. And you can almost say, in the case of Waltham, that Waltham's geography was Waltham's destiny, because the Charles River, along the Charles River in Waltham, there are two waterfalls. And one of them is at Moody Street, and you can see it right here. And that's going to provide the power for the Boston Manufacturing Company. The other waterfall we'll talk about a little bit later in the program. And if you say geography is destiny, so why did the Boston Manufacturing Company locate in Waltham? Well, you have the power of the Charles River right here. And secondly, if you look at the Waltham Common, and right above it is Main Street, Route 20, right along there. And that it was called the Great Country Road. And that was just a short 9-mile trip into Boston. So we were close to a major city, and we had the power from the Charles River to power a factory. And this is, of course, the Moody Street Falls. If you're familiar with older Waltham, you'll recognize that this picture was taken a number of years ago. This building over here, Mackenzie Travel, is no longer there. That was purchased by the city of Waltham, and that's now part of the Riverwalk. So you can walk along the Charles River and go right up to Moody Street. And the other big change is the bridge, the Moody Street Bridge right along here. When Mayor Stanley was in office, the bridge was rebuilt, and the sides, the concrete sides were taken off. So now when you drive over it, there are very attractive railings, and you can see the Charles River. If you look at the waterfall, that's a 10-foot drop. And the reason that the Boston Manufacturing Company is going to come to Waltham is there is your power source. This old engraving here is the oldest picture in existence of Waltham. This appeared in Massachusetts Magazine in 1793. And what you're looking at here is right over here. This is the Boyce paper mill. A Waltham resident by the name of John Boyce, in 1788, he put a dam along the Charles River, the Moody Street Dam, which is today called the Moody Street Dam, and he built a small paper mill, the Boyce paper mill right here. If you look very carefully at the painting, at the engraving, you'll see a water wheel right here. And here's the falls, and here's the river. Now, you might be looking at this and say, well, wait a minute, it's backwards. You're on the Pine Street side looking at the river. The reason it's backwards is, from what I understand, years ago, they would do the sketch, and then they'd do it on glass or something like that, and then they would flip it over and make an image, so everything would be reversed. And you see a couple of small buildings in the distance, but this is downtown Waltham in 1793. That was when George Washington was president. So you have a small paper mill right here. Later on, you're going to get Governor Gore is going to build a paper mill down on River Street, where the Waltham Bleachery will end up. And then at the other end of Waltham on Stony Brook, Nathan Upham will open a paper mill there in 1801. So some of the earliest industries along the Charles River were paper mills. Okay, we've got 4 different individuals here that we're going to speak about. And the first one, this man up here, we have a silhouette. There's no likeness of him. That's Francis Cabot Lowell. He's born in 1775, instrumental in as merchants in the trading business. He attends Harvard. He's something of a mathematical genius. When he graduates, he gets involved in the family business. His ships are traveling to China and all over the world. And he's something of a workaholic. And as a young man, he falls into bad health. And in 1810, he's ready for a vacation. He's got to slow down. So he, his wife, and his family, they traveled to England. And that was something that wealthy people do when they needed rest. You would go to England and rejuvenate. So Francis Cabot Lowell goes to England, and being a typical workaholic, he can't rest. So he gets to England and he tours the factories in England. Now, of course, the Industrial Revolution had begun in England in the mid 1750s in the textile industry. Lowell does not go to England to spy on their machines, but when he's there, that's what he ends up doing. And he visits various textile mills. And remember, he's something of a mathematical genius. He goes into the textile mills and he's looking at the machinery and he sees, for example, spinning jennies, which have already been smuggled into America by Samuel Slater, Slater's mill down in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. But he sees another machine, and it's the most advanced technology in the world at the time. It's the power loom. It will weave thread into cloth. Now, Lowell can't write anything down as he tours the textile mills, but he's got a photographic memory. He's a mathematical genius, and he's looking at these machines and gaining an understanding of how they work. Now, you have to remember the time he's going, 1810, he's there 1811. I believe he returns in 1812. We're about to enter war with Great Britain, the War of 1812. What's going to happen in the war? England is going to blockade the coast of the United States and shut down all trading. Francis Cabot Lowell is looking for another business, another way to earn money. So without writing anything down, he returns to America. And he has seen the Industrial Revolution in England, and he's determined to bring the Industrial Revolution to America. But he needs money, he needs investors. So he approaches the man on the left, right over here, and a famous American. His name is Nathan Appleton. And he asks Appleton if he wants to invest in this idea he has of opening a textile mill in America. He doesn't know where yet, but open a textile mill that will combine spinning jennies with power looms. In other words, all of the processes to produce cloth will be done under one roof. Appleton is going to invest. He approaches the man underneath. His name is Patrick Tracy Jackson. He is married to Francis Cabot Lowell's sister. He invests. He approaches other friends and family members. This is a tight-knit group of people. They'll become known as the Boston Associates. Altogether, Lowell is going to raise $400,000 for this concept he has of beginning the Industrial Revolution in America. No one knows if it'll work or not. It's all dependent on the power loom. So he has his money. He has $400,000, which in 1812, 1813, that's an enormous amount of money. The typical textile mill in America, they would be capitalized at maybe 5,000, perhaps 10,000, but no one is capitalizing a company at $400,000. So he has a substantial cash advantage, but he needs a power loom. And he approaches Paul Moody, the man in the lower right-hand corner. Uh, Paul Moody is not a wealthy man. He's a mechanic, and he lives up in Amesbury, Massachusetts. And Lowell meets with him and explains the concept. He's seen the power looms. He can sketch them out for Moody. Moody, with Lowell and with Nathan Appleton, are going to recreate with improvements the power loom that they saw in England. So now Lowell has the money. Lowell has the power loom. So we now have the most advanced technology in the world in America. He now needs a location. And Francis Cabot Lowell is a Bostonian, but he selects Waltham. And as I said before, he selects it because right here, there's the Charles River. You've got a 10-foot drop that's going to provide the power. And there's already a dam there from John Boyce's paper mill. So Lowell is going to purchase, he and his associates are going to purchase the Boyce paper mill for $1,000. And their plan is to build a factory along the Charles River. This is a really interesting painting. The original is in Gore Place. And when you look at this, it's really, you're going from agrarian America, farming America, to industrial America. If you look in the far left-hand corner, there's two men there. And the man on the left is pointing across the river. It looks like he's pointing with pride at this mammoth factory that's opening up along the Charles River. It was uh, most likely the largest building in America at the time. So he's pointing with pride there. But if you look right along here, you see the old stone walls of the farmers. This is the south side of Waltham. The old stone walls. You see a few little houses. So you begin to see the beginning of industrialization intruding on agrarian America. So Alexander Hamilton's vision of America was industry and commerce. Thomas Jefferson's vision of America was an agrarian country. And of course, Hamilton's vision is going to come out on top. That's Prospect Hill in the background right there. This is another painting, and this was done in 1820. And this is another view of the Boston Manufacturing Company. So right here, that's the original mill that was built in 1813. The date is still on it. You can see it from the Moody Street Bridge. On the top, you'll see a bell tower, which will summon the workers to work and let them know when to go on breaks and lunch and all those things. And the company will be successful. And he builds another mill in 1816 right here. And then eventually the mills are connected and they expand all the way down the Charles River. This is roughly where River Street is today. And over here on the right, you'll see some of the worker housing that we'll be talking about that the Boston Associates are going to build for the workers at the Boston Manufacturing Company. The corporate logo is right here, the Boston Manufacturing Company. In the middle is the machine that made the company possible, the American Power Loom. And as I said, it's not just a recreation of the British loom, it's a recreation with improvements. So the Boston Manufacturing Company will be considered the beginning of the American Industrial Revolution. Why? For the first time in the history of the United States, all of the processes to produce cloth under one roof are going to be done under one roof using water-powered machinery. Cloth will be brushed, it will be combed, it will be cleaned. The spinning jennies will spin it into thread, and the looms will weave it into cloth. Everything done under one roof. Okay, so Lowell, he has the money, he has the location, he has the machinery, he needs a workforce. And the workforce that Lowell is going to decide on are young farm girls from local farm girls and from different areas of New England. They'll become known as mill girls. And he's going to employ a female workforce for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is they're available. At the time, there's a shortage of labor in America. Uh, these young teenage girls and women in their early 20s are working on the farms, but they're an available workforce, so he can hire them. Secondly, of course, at the time, he could pay them a little bit less. And thirdly, they've got smaller hands that would be ideally suited for the textile machinery. But he has to attract these girls to Waltham. not only attract them to go to work in a factory, but he has to convince their parents to allow these young women to leave the farms and come to Waltham. So what's he going to offer? He's going to offer cash wages, and it's going to be $2 to $4 a week for about 70 to 80 hours a week, depending on the time of year. Now, $2 to $4 a week does not sound like a lot of money, but in 1813, 1814, that is a substantial amount of money to be given in cash every week. Secondly, he's going to offer them housing. So Lowell is going to build, in effect, similar to college dormitories, row houses, company-owned boarding houses where the girls will live with roommates, but also with chaperones. So he can say to the parents, send your daughters to Waltham, I will pay them, I will house them, and I will chaperone them. There will be matrons in each of the boarding houses owned by the Boston Manufacturing Company who will watch over the girls and make sure everything is good. You might recognize this. These are row houses right along River Street in Waltham, down by the car wash, right by the company itself. And Waltham today, Ward Isaacson has done a lot of research on this. Um, we have one of the finest collections of factory housing in the United States today. And this is a little further down, but more of the row houses built by the Boston Manufacturing Company. And way off in the distance, there's the part of the mill right there, the 1890 mill. So this is River Street. This is one of the most interesting boarding houses in Waltham. This is on a street called Lawton Place. It is right off of River Street and Jackson Street. You can tell by the cars that this is a 1970s picture of one of the boarding houses of the Boston Manufacturing Company, still standing today. And here's another view of it. You can see the sign over here, Lawton Place. More of the factory housing in Waltham. So whole River Street area, the downtown area is filled with housing built by the Boston Manufacturing Company. Some of the housing over the years has been moved from the Waltham Common to other places, but all housing built by the factory to house the workers. And this is right across from the car wash, another row house. I think it's called Elm Court. And if you look right along here, the river would be right down there. This is the back of the boarding house I showed you a couple of pictures ago, right along the Charles River. So the Boston Associates purchased all of the land from roughly Moody Street all the way down to the Watertown line. Some more factory housing right here. I believe this is on right off of Jackson Street. This is an 1819 map of Waltham. All right, so we mentioned that, geography can be destiny. So right here, we have the Moody Street Falls. So this is the Power Fear Factory. And right here, you see where it says Waltham Plain. If you're familiar with Waltham, uh, we've got a huge section of Waltham that's completely flat. So why is Main Street where it is? It's there because that was the flat land. That would have been a path used by Native Americans back before the colonial settlers were even here. And eventually that will develop into Route 20, Waltham's main street. So the Boston Manufacturing Company, you've got the power. You can receive supplies from Boston right along the Great Country Road. You can ship your cloth before the railroad is built right along the Great Country Road, 9 miles into Boston. But look at the other end of Waltham. Look at the east end. And in 1819, you'll see Waltham Factory right down here. Now, in 1819, That's a company called the Waltham Cotton and Wool Company. It opens in 1810. It's Waltham's first large factory. They employed 200 workers. They had a factory school. In fact, right off of Willow Street by the gas station by Protec, you'll see a little street there called School Avenue. Why is it School Avenue? That's where the Cotton and Wool Company ran their factory school. They had a store, they had a school, they built housing, and they were a factory of, they had spinning jennies. And then they would take the thread and they would farm it out to farmers who would weave it into cloth. So that's the first factory. And there's a little 3-foot drop right there in the Charles River that's going to power that. So that's 1810. Boston Manufacturing Company comes in 1814. The War of 1812 is going to end in 1814. And what happens after that? England is going to flood the United States with inexpensive textiles. The war is over, the blockade is over. The Boston Manufacturing Company has enormous cash reserves. The Waltham Cotton and Wool Company, like most of the spinning mills all over America, are in financial trouble, whether in Pawtucket, whether in Waltham, whether in other towns. They're closing down. There was also a tariff that was passed in 1816 that protected, that is called the Tariff of 1816. It protected the type of cloth manufactured by the Boston Manufacturing Company, but not the products of um, these spinning mills, which is sometimes referred to as Rhode Island system mills. So Waltham Cotton and Wool Company, they decide they want to sell. They approach the Boston Manufacturing Company. We'll sell you the factory. We'll sell you all the assets, the school, the store, the housing, $25,000. And the Boston Manufacturing Company says, nope, it's too much. And they wait a few years. By 1819, the Cotton and Wool Company is desperate, and they lower the price to $16,000, and they sell out to the Boston Manufacturing Company. So by 1819, 1820, the Boston Manufacturing Company controls all of this from the Watertown line all the way down to Moody Street. When Francis Cabot Lowell went to England, he observed the machinery, but he observed something else. He observed horrible working conditions. And being the a man who believed in civic virtue, uh, being a descendant of the old Puritans, there was nothing wrong with success. There was nothing wrong with making money, but it had to be done in an honorable way. So what Lowell is trying to do, he's trying to create an industrial system in the United States that will be profitable, but will not feature the grinding poverty that he observed in England. In England, he saw child labor. He saw people working working to the death, and he said, "I don't want to bring that to America." So, what's he going to do? Well, he's not going to use child labor. He's going to use mill girls. He's also going to make a number of contributions to the town of Waltham. One of the contributions, so he's trying to create this nice community. I wouldn't go so far as to call it a utopia, but he's trying to create an ideal factory system around his mill. And right at the corner of Main Street and Elm Street, right here, he builds Rumford Hall. I shouldn't say he. Francis Cabot Lowell dies in 1817, but Patrick Tracy Jackson and the other Boston associates build Rumford Hall. What was Rumford Hall? It's Waltham's first town hall. It's built in 1826. They begin Waltham's first library in this building. The public library traces its ancestry back to the Boston Manufacturing Company. They also open on the top floor a lyceum for adult education. So right up here, This is a place that the mill girls on Saturday nights could go and they could hear speakers come in and lecture on various topics. So this is Main Street, this is Elm Street, this is the Waltham Common. This building is going to stand until 1925-26. So here is Rumford Hall, and you'll recognize this, Waltham City Hall, which is built in 1925. I believe it opens in 1926. So Old Rumford Hall functions as Waltham's Town Hall from 1826, really for 100 years till 1926, till the current City Hall is built. And this is the view from Elm Street. Here is the corner of Waltham City Hall today. Here is Rumford Hall, which will be torn down. And a number of Rumford Hall, by the way, it's one of the earliest lyceums, adult lecture halls, adult educational facilities in the United States. And famous people came and they would speak there. That you could become a member of you could join the Rumford Hall, the Rumford Institute. You could join there. I believe it was 50 cents a year, and it gave you admission to all the different speakers that would come in. So Ralph Waldo Emerson came to Waltham a number of times to speak at Rumford Hall. Um, Edward Everett. Edward Everett was governor of Massachusetts, president of Harvard University at one time. He also is famous at Gettysburg. He gave the introductory speech before President Lincoln gave the famous Gettysburg Address. Of course, Mark Twain, everyone's familiar with, great American author. Harriet Martineau, an English woman who toured America. She wrote a three-volume series of what she observed when she came to America. I believe it's called Society in America. And she visited Waltham because what was going on in Waltham was unique. You had um, industrialization, you had mill girls, you had a nice community, you did not have the poverty that existed in England. So she wrote very favorably of what she saw at Rumford Hall and the Rumford Institute and what she saw at the Boston Manufacturing Company. Okay, other contributions that the company made, they built churches for the workers. And this is roughly from Main Street, looking south, way over here. This is the Boston Manufacturing Company. You can see the bell tower right there. This was Patrick Tracy Jackson was the manager of the company for a while. This is house, which used to be on the Waltham Common. This building here, it was called the Lawn Block. It was a row house. It was housing for workers that used to be on the Waltham Common. So the company is providing housing. They're building streets. They build River Street. They build Newton Street. They build Willow Street. They build Pleasant Street. So they're building streets. They're building housing. They're building churches for the workers. And they're also building schools. Now, these are not just schools for um, children of mill girls. These are schools, these are public schools built by the Boston Manufacturing Company. The Boston Manufacturing Company paid the teachers. The Boston Manufacturing Company equipped the schools, and the company did this from 1817 right into the 1860s. This building here was on Elm Street, right opposite Waltham Common, and it was a factory school, used as a factory school that was built in 1817. That was torn down, I believe, in the 1940s. And right where Waltham Car Wash is, Boston Manufacturing Company opens an ultra-modern school in 1835. And here it is. It was referred to as the Stone Schoolhouse. You'll notice the Greek Revival architecture. And they build that for the town of Waltham, and they're paying for the teacher and the supplies and everything else. They also built another school down by the Waltham Bleachery, which we'll talk about in a minute. Okay, so we looked at the Moody Street Falls. The other waterfall on the Charles River is right at the Watertown line where Shaw's is today. And this is where the Waltham Cotton and Wool Company located. Why did they locate there? They had a power source. If you go down there today, you can actually see, just like you can at Moody Street, you can see the beginning of the canal that used to come off the river and power the company. So there you have a power source. And in 1820, the Boston Manufacturing Company hears down the Cotton and Wool Company, and they build a bleachery, the Waltham Bleachery and Dye Works. It is right where the shopping plaza is, right on the Watertown line, right along River Street. And the purpose of this company was to bleach, dye, and finish the cotton cloth manufactured by the company on Moody Street. So this is really a satellite industry of the Boston Manufacturing Company. And this is something of a bucolic view, a romantic view of the Charles River and the company. You see the boat here with some kids in it and some farm animals and the river right over here. Here's the bell tower. Waltham Bleachery and Dye Works is the first bleachery in the United States. And here's a photograph of it. So you're looking at the same building you just saw the drawing of. Once again, notice the bell tower right up here that would bring the workers to work. Okay, and if you look at this old drawing, the Waltham Bleachery, here's the pictures you've been looking at right there. There's the bell tower. And the company is going to expand all the way down the Charles River. Eventually, all these buildings will be brick. It will be a huge industrial complex. It will be in business from 1820 to 1951. After 1951, the company, the bleachery closes down for a number of reasons. It's used by Raytheon Corporation for a while. And in 1964, the worst industrial fire up to that point in time, the old Waltham Bleachery burns down and the shopping plaza is built there. This is a photograph. This is 1870s, 1880s, and you're on the south side of Waltham. You're looking across the river, and you're seeing the Waltham Bleachery right here. And this is the old train trestle bridge. The train ran from, there was a loop that ran from the Boston Manufacturing Company across the south side, right down to the bleachery to bring the cloth there to bleach it and dye it. Really interesting picture. Here's the inside of the Waltham Bleachery, probably early 20th century here. The bleachery never had as many employees as Boston Manufacturing. I believe the peak number of employees was 500. Another satellite industry of the Boston Manufacturing Company was located just across the river along what is today Newton Street, down towards High Street, roughly where Babe Ruth Field, St. Charles Church, and it was called the Newton Chemical Company. Now, why was it called the Newton Chemical Company? Because the other side of the river was owned by Newton right up until 1849. Okay, so what did this company do? This company opened in 1825, and it produced uh, the various chemicals needed by the bleachery and by the Boston Manufacturing Company. So the Boston Manufacturing Company, really, you've got the main mill on Moody Street. You've got a satellite industry with the Waltham Bleachery and another satellite industry with the Newton Chemical Company. That section of Waltham, even today, is referred to as the chemistry section. In 1872, company will close down. The land will be sold off as house lots. I mentioned that the the Boston Associates owned all of the land from Moody Street down to the Watertown line. You might recognize this. This is Sacred Heart parking lot right here. And if you look right over here, you'll see a fairly large apartment building today. That was built by Francis Cabot Lowell II. So Lowell builds a mansion. At the time, it was, a very fancy mansion, and he locates it between the Waltham Bleachery and the Boston Manufacturing Company. And also, Beaver Brook flows right into the Charles River. It went right through his property. So this is Francis Cabot Lowell II's mansion in Waltham. There's another view of it today. Okay, so what's going on with the Boston Manufacturing Company? They're expanding, they're making money. They're expanding right down the Charles River. And you're going down the length of it, you'll notice you see smokestacks. They've exhausted the water power of the river. They've now brought in steam. They're burning coal. They've got buildings that are no longer standing right along the Charles River. That's part of Richard Landry Park today. Everything else you see here is still standing. So the company is expanding down the river. Financially, they're doing very well. And this is a view, 1890s. You're on the south side, and you're looking across roughly where Pine Street is. Here's the Moody Street Falls. Here's the river right along here. And here's the Boston Manufacturing Company expanding right down the river. You'll notice the steam power. They're burning coal right here. But I want you to notice the roof. The roof was a pitched roof, and I believe it was 1891 when they expanded. They went up another story and put on the flat roof that you see today. If you look at this engraving here, I'll point out a few things. Moody Street Bridge, a little steamboat, it was called the White Swan. It went from the Moody Street Bridge down to where the Marriott is today. That used to be Norumbega Park. It went up and down the Charles River. Moody Street Falls, but they built a canal. The company builds a canal, and here it is here. So you force the water into the canal. It goes underneath the mill. It spins the water wheel, the turbine, which creates the power for the machines. So there's your power source right here. That canal is going to be filled in 1961. Today it's part of the mill yard. It's a parking lot at the Senior Citizen Complex. And you'll notice also the railroad. So the Boston Manufacturing Company, look at the railroad in Waltham. It goes right by the Boston Manufacturing Company. Of course, that's not by accident. The company would be a major customer of the railroad. And then you'll see a spur line right here. Is the train going down across the south side, and it's going to loop on over the Charles River to the Waltham Bleachery and Dye Works. And this is the south side of Waltham over here. And this is the section right here. You can't see it. The chemistry is not actually here. This is the chemistry section of Waltham. Babe Ruth Field would be right over here. Here's the Newton Street Bridge. So the Newton Street Bridge, if you went over it, and that was built by the company, by the way, if you went over the bridge, just beyond that would be the Newton Chemical Company. So this is 1877. Newton Chemical Company had been out of business for 5 years. They're starting to build the streets and put in the house lots. Here's a picture of the old canal. All of the buildings you see here are still standing. All these mill buildings are still standing. And the canal, once again, went through the mill yard, underneath the company, and that's where the company powered the machinery from. This is an old postcard, but it was also used as a Christmas card. So December 15th, 1904, someone is writing Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And you'll see the Boston Manufacturing Company, all of the buildings still standing. This was the treasurer's office right here. The company safe, I believe, is still in that building. And here is the old canal that was filled in, and that's all parking today. And this is a drawing. I believe the original's in the Waltham Public Library. You'll see 1918. This was done by a man named Ryan. That was his last name. I'm drawing a blank on his first name, but he drew sketches of various historic points in Waltham. And here's the Boston Manufacturing Company. And I think it's Albert Ryan, maybe. And his right here is the canal. And here's some of the worker housing, which would be in the Carter Street area before the railroad came through. I took this picture a few years ago, and I took it during the summer. And you'll see a problem here. The Charles River is not a huge river. And at different times of the year, during times of drought, there's just not a whole lot of power there. So the day I took this picture, I could have walked across the Charles River and not got my knees wet. This is right below the dam. So what happens? The investors in the Boston Manufacturing Company, they're making excellent profits in Waltham, but they have to expand. They need a bigger river. They exhaust the water power in Waltham, and they expand in what is today Lowell, Massachusetts. At the time, it was East Chelmsford. And there you have the Merrimack River, and you've got a huge waterfall. This is just a little piece of it, and they're going to build, on farmland, really an entire planned industrial community. Waltham is first. Waltham is the birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution. But what began in Waltham was done on a much larger scale in Lowell, Massachusetts. The same people who began Lowell, Massachusetts, named, of course, after Francis Cabot Lowell. He passed away in 1817. The same people who began Lowell, Massachusetts, they're the investors in the Boston Manufacturing Company. Paul Moody is going to go from Waltham up to Lowell, and the whole machine shop is going to eventually go up there, and he's going to create the machinery for the various textile mills in Lowell, Massachusetts. One of the unique things that the Boston Manufacturing Company did, they're the first company in the world to weave silk. And they weave really a picture of an idealized picture of themselves, of the company. So here's the 1813 mill, the original mill, and it goes right down the river. And this was built in 1880. This is River Street over here. You'll notice the railroad has come in. Here's the Moody Street Bridge, and here's the canal. But they become the first company in the world to weave silk. A couple of the buildings, Boston Manufacturing Company buildings, you can still see remnants of the Industrial Revolution. And this is I believe it's the 1873 mill. And right up here, that's a line shaft. And you'll see these giant wheels that used to have leather belts that would come down from the line shaft, and they would go to the machinery and power the machinery. So a little remnant of the Boston Manufacturing Company. And traveling around Waltham, you see so many reminders of the Boston Manufacturing Company. The building is still standing. So, thank God it was not ripped down. It was restored and repurposed as senior citizen housing in the 1970s and 1980s. It's also the location of the Charles River Museum of Industry. You'll also see a lot of streets with names that go back to the Boston Manufacturing Company. Moody Street, Paul Moody Street, Patrick Tracy Jackson Street, Nathan Appleton Street, Francis Cabot Lowell Street. And one of the things that I think is fascinating, one of the major, obviously Main Street is probably the most significant street in Waltham. But I would say Moody Street is right up there with Main Street for significance. Notice who Waltham names Moody Street after. It's not named after Francis Cabot Lowell. It's not named after one of the wealthy Bostonians. It's named after the mechanic. It's named after Paul Moody. It's named after the man who actually built the power loom, a worker. And Waltham's identity, we have always been a proud working class community. And we honor Paul Moody, and we honor this we this work ethic that's always existed in Waltham by naming one of our main thoroughfares after Paul Moody. And the purpose of this program is not to give a comprehensive history of Boston Manufacturing Company. It's really the early years, but right here you'll see this is the full expansion of the Boston Manufacturing Company. Here's the Moody Street Bridge. Here's the canal. So we know this picture is before 1961. Way over here, this is the last building constructed by the Boston Manufacturing Company. It's a boiler house, a boiler room. It was built in 1911. Today, that is the home of the Charles River Museum of Industry. Looking in the background, you'll see some of the worker housing along River Street. This would be the Waltham Common. And here is the old train station. It was a beautiful building that very short-sightedly was knocked down by Waltham to put in the Carter Street parking lot where the train station is, the modern train station, nothing like this elaborate train station that we used to have. You'll all recognize this as Waltham City seal. And a lot of times you'll look at seals of towns and cities in Massachusetts, and you see Native Americans, you see mountains, you see rivers, you see trees. You don't often see businesses. But Waltham's identity, we are an industrial town, and we have always been proud of our industrial history. So in 1738, we're incorporated as a town, the town of Waltham. In 1884, the city of Waltham. And in 1884, the city seal was formed. And what were the two major events in Waltham history? The Industrial Revolution. At the top, the opening of the Boston Manufacturing Company on Moody Street. Underneath, in 1854, another industry comes to Waltham that will make the city famous, the Waltham Watch Factory. So Waltham honors its factories and its industrialism and its working class roots. Modern postcard of Waltham. So Moody Street Bridge, Charles River, and right here you see the falls. This is a fish ladder that was put in the 1970s to allow fish to migrate up the Charles River when they're spawning, the herring, for example. You'll notice that you don't see the canal. The canal was filled in. However, if you go right down here today, you can still see a little tiny chunk of the canal right here. Here's the Boston Manufacturing Company, senior citizen housing today. I mentioned that the hitched roof was removed and another story was put on. So the roof was flattened out, another floor was put on. To this day, if you're driving on Moody Street, take a look at the company and you'll notice that the brick, it's two different shades of brick. So this is a little bit darker than the newer brick that was put on in, I believe it was 1891. And here's the Waltham Common. And right along here, this would be Lexington Street. But one of the interesting things here, notice that the further away you get from the Charles River, the more green you're going to see. So Waltham develops is an industrial community. Why? Because of the Charles River. And the Charles River and right along Main Street becomes the industrial section of Waltham. North Waltham was farmland right into the 1950s. There were still farms here into the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and 90s even. So we had Northern Waltham, North Waltham, really until 128 comes through here in 1952, is really primarily just farmland, and South Waltham is urbanized. Thank you very much for watching the program. I encourage you to go on the Waltham Historical Society website. There's a number of our programs that you can watch at your leisure. And I'd encourage you to join this organization. It has been active in Waltham since 1913. Our current headquarters, we have the whole second floor of the Bright School. The Historical Society puts on lectures and various programs and various walks in Waltham throughout the year. So I encourage you to go on the website and become a member um, and join in the effort to preserve Waltham's history. Thank you very much.